Introduction. Bermuda Triangle, section of the North Atlantic Ocean off North America in which more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes are said to have mysteriously disappeared. The area, whose boundaries are not universally agreed upon, has a triangular shape that reaches approximately from the Atlantic coast of Florida to Bermuda, to the islands known as the Greater Antilles. Reports of unexplained occurrences in the region date to the mid-19th century. Some ships were discovered completely abandoned for no apparent reason. Others transmitted no distress signals and were never seen or heard from again. Aircraft have been reported and then vanished, and rescue missions are said to have vanished when flying in the area. However, wreckage has not been found, and some of the theories advanced to explain the repeated mysteries have been fanciful. Although theories of supernatural causes for these disappearances abound, geophysical and environmental factors are most likely responsible. One hypothesis is that pilots failed to account for the agonic line, the place at which there is no need to compensate for magnetic compass variation, as they approached the Bermuda Triangle, resulting in significant navigational error and catastrophe. Another popular theory is that the missing vessels were felled by so-called rogue waves, which are massive waves that can reach heights of up to 30.5 meters, 100 feet, and would theoretically be powerful enough to destroy all evidence of a ship or an airplane. The Bermuda Triangle is located in an area of the Atlantic Ocean where storms from multiple directions can converge, making rogue waves more likely to occur. According to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, there is no evidence that mysterious disappearances occur with any greater frequency in the Bermuda Triangle than in any other large, well-traveled area of the ocean, and boaters and flyers continue to venture through the triangle without event. USS Cyclopse. The USS Cyclopse was the second of 4 Proteus-class colliers built for the United States Navy several years before World War I. Named after the Cyclopes, a race of giants from Greek mythology, she was the second U.S. naval vessel to bear the name. The loss of the ship and 306 crew and passengers, without a trace sometime after 4th of March 1918, remains the single largest loss of life in the history of the United States Navy not directly involving combat. As the loss occurred during World War I, she was thought to have been captured or sunk by a German raider or submarine because she was carrying 10,800 long tons, 11,000 t, of manganese ore used to produce munitions, but German authorities at the time and subsequently denied any knowledge of the vessel. The Naval History and Heritage Command has stated she probably sank in an unexpected storm, but the cause of the ship's loss is not known. The history. Cyclops was launched on 7th May 1910 by William Cramp and Sons of Philadelphia and placed in service on 7th November 1910. Operating with the Naval Auxiliary Service Atlantic Fleet, she voyaged in the Baltic from May to July 1911 to supply 2nd Division ships. Returning to Norfolk, Virginia, she operated on the east coast from Newport, Rhode Island to the Caribbean, servicing the fleet. During the United States occupation of Veracruz in Mexico in 1914-1915, she coaled ships on patrol there and received the thanks of the U.S. State Department for cooperation in evacuating refugees. With American entry into World War I, Cyclops was commissioned on 1st May 1917. She joined a convoy for Saint-Nazaire, France in June 1917, returning to the U.S. in July. Except for a voyage to Halifax, Nova Scotia, she served along the East Coast until 9th January 1918, when she was assigned to the Naval Overseas Transportation Service. She then sailed to Brazilian waters to fuel British ships in the South Atlantic, receiving the thanks of the U.S. State Department and Commander-in-Chief Pacific. The disappearance. The ship put to sea from Rio de Janeiro on the 16th February 1918 and entered Salvador on 20th February. 2 days later, she departed for Baltimore, Maryland, with no stops scheduled, carrying the manganese ore. The ship was thought to be overloaded when she left Brazil, as her maximum capacity was 8,000 long tons, 8,100 t. Before leaving port, Commander Worley had submitted a report that the starboard engine had a cracked cylinder and was not operative. This report was confirmed by a survey board, which recommended, however, that the ship be returned to the United States. She made an unscheduled stop in Barbados because the water level was over the Plimsoll line, indicating that it was overloaded, but investigations in Rio proved the ship had been loaded and secured properly. Cyclops then set out for Baltimore on the 4th of March and was rumored to have been sighted on 9th March by the molasses tanker Amolco near Virginia, but this was denied by Amolco's captain. Additionally, Because Cyclopse was not due in Baltimore until 13th of March, the ship was highly unlikely to have been near Virginia on 9th March, as that location would have placed her only about a day from Baltimore. In any event, Cyclopse never arrived in Baltimore, and no wreckage of the ship has ever been found. Reports indicate that on 10th March, the day after Cyclopse was rumored to have been sighted by a Mulco, a violent storm swept through the Virginia Capes area. While some suggest that the combination of the overloaded condition, engine trouble, and bad weather may have conspired to sink Cyclopse, an extensive naval investigation concluded. Many theories have been advanced, but none that satisfactorily accounts for her disappearance. This summation was written, however, before two of Cyclopse's sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, vanished at sea during World War II, less than a year after their sale to civilian operators. Both ships were transporting heavy loads of metallic ore, similar to that which was loaded on Cyclopse during her fatal voyage. In both cases, their loss was theorized to have been the result of catastrophic structural failure, but a more outlandish theory attributes all three vessels' disappearances to the Bermuda Triangle. Rear Admiral George Van Deurs suggested that the loss of Cyclopse could be owing to structural failure, as her sister ship suffered from issues where the I-beams that ran the length of the ship had eroded due to the corrosive nature of some of the cargo carried. This was observed definitively on USS Jason, and is believed to have contributed to the sinking of another similar freighter, Chuki, which snapped in two in calm seas. Moreover, Cyclopse may have hit a storm with 30-40 knot, 56-74 kmh, 35-46 mph winds. These would have resulted in waves just far enough apart to leave the bow and stern supported on the peaks of successive waves, but with the middle unsupported, resulting in extra strain on the already weakened central area. On the 1st June 1918, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Franklin D. Roosevelt declared Cyclopse to be officially lost and all hands deceased. One of the seamen lost aboard Cyclopse was African-American mess attendant Lewis H. Hardwick, the father of Herbert Lewis Hardwick, the Coco Kid, an Afro-Puerto Rican welterweight boxer who was a top contender in the 1930s and 1940s, who won the world-colored welterweight and world-colored middleweight championships. In 1918, a short summary of the loss of Cyclopse was listed in the U.S. Navy Annual Report. For a BBC Radio 4 documentary, Tom Mangold had an expert from Lloyd's investigate the loss of Cyclopse. The expert noted that manganese ore, being much denser than coal, had room to move within the holds even when fully laden. The hatch covers were canvas, and that when wet, the ore can become a slurry. As such, the load could shift and cause the ship to list. Combined with a possible loss of power from its one engine, it could founder in bad weather. The captain, investigations by the Office of Naval Intelligence, revealed that Captain Worley was born Johann Friedrich Wickmann in Sandstedt, Hanover, Germany. In 1862, the official Navy Register lists his date of birth as 11 December 1865, and that he had entered America by jumping ship in San Francisco in 1878. By 1898, he had changed his name to Worley, after a seaman friend, and owned and operated a saloon in San Francisco's Barbary Coast. He also got help from brothers, whom he had convinced to emigrate. During this time, he had qualified for the position of ship's master and had commanded several civilian merchant ships, picking up and delivering cargo, both legal and illegal, some accounts say opium, from the Far East to San Francisco. Unfortunately, the crews of these ships reported that Worley suffered from a personality allegedly akin to that sometimes ascribed to HMS Pandora's Captain Edward Edwards, with the crew often being brutalized by Worley for trivial things. Worley was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the Naval Auxiliary Reserve on 21 February 1917. Naval investigators discovered information from former crew members about Worley's habits. He would berate and curse officers and men for minor offenses, sometimes getting violent. At one point, he had allegedly chased an ensign about the ship with a pistol. Saner times found him making his rounds about the ship dressed in long underwear and a derby hat. Worley sometimes would have an inexperienced officer in charge of loading cargo on the ship, while the more experienced man was confined to quarters. In Rio de Janeiro, one such man was assigned to oversee the loading of manganese ore, something a collier was not used to carrying, and in this instance the ship may have been overloaded, which may have contributed to her sinking. The most serious accusation against Worley was that he was pro-German in wartime and may have colluded with the enemy. Indeed, his closest friends and associates were either German or Americans of German descent. Many Germanic names appear, Livingston stated, speculating that the ship had many German sympathizers on board. One of the passengers on the final voyage was Alfred Louis Moreau Gottschalk, the Consul General in Rio de Janeiro, who was as roundly hated for his pro-German sympathies as was Worley. Livingston stated he believed Gottschalk may have been directly involved in collaborating with Worley on handing the ship over to the Germans. After World War I, German records were checked to ascertain the fate of Cyclopse, whether by Worley's hand or by submarine attack. Nothing was found. Near the time the search for Cyclopse was called off, a telegram was received by the State Department from Charles Ludlow Livingston, the U.S. Consul on Barbados. Department's 15th. Confidential. Master Cyclopse stated that required 600 tons coal having sufficient on board to reach Bermuda. Engines very poor condition. Not sufficient funds and therefore requested payment by me. Unusually reticent. I have ascertained he took here ton fresh meat, ton flour, 1,000 pounds vegetables, paying therefore $775. From different sources gather the following. He had plenty of coal, alleged inferior, took coal to mix, probably had more than 1,500 tons. Master alluded to by others as damned Dutchman, apparently disliked by other officers. Rumored disturbances en route hither, men confined and one executed. Also had some prisoners from the fleet in Brazilian waters, one life sentence. United States Consul General Gottschalk passenger, 231 crew exclusive of officers and passengers. Have names of crew but not of all the officers and passengers. Many Germanic names appear. Number telegraphic or wireless messages addressed to master or in care of ship were delivered at this port. All telegrams for Barbados on file, head office St. Thomas. I have to suggest scrutiny there. While not having any definite grounds, I fear fate worse than sinking, though possibly based on instinctive dislike felt towards master. The flights. At 2:10 p.m. on December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers comprising Flight 19 take off from the Fefter, Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida on a routine 3-hour training mission. After having completed their objective, Flight 19 was scheduled to take them due east for an additional 67 miles, then turn north for 73 miles, and back to the air station after that, totaling a distance of 120 miles. They never returned. 2 hours after the flight began, the leader of the squadron, who had been flying in the area for more than 6 months, reported that his compass and backup compass had failed, and that his position was unknown. The other planes experienced similar instrument malfunctions. Radio facilities on land were contacted to find the location of the lost squadron, but none were successful. After 2 more hours of confused messages from the flyers, a distorted radio transmission from the squadron leader was heard at 6:20 p.m., apparently calling for his men to prepare to ditch their aircraft simultaneously because of lack of fuel. By this time, several land radar stations finally determined that Flight 19 was somewhere north of the Bahamas and east of the Florida coast, and at 7:27 p.m. a search and rescue Mariner aircraft took off with a 13-man crew. 3 minutes later, the Mariner aircraft radioed to its home base that its mission was underway. The Mariner was never heard from again. Later, there was a report from a tanker cruising off the coast of Florida of a visible explosion seen at 7:50 p.m. The disappearance of the 14 men of Flight 19 and the 13 men of the Mariner led to one of the largest air and seas searches to that date, and hundreds of ships and aircraft combed thousands of square miles of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and remote locations within the interior of Florida. No trace of the bodies or aircraft was ever found. Although naval officials maintained that the remains of the 6 aircraft and 27 men were not found because stormy weather destroyed the evidence, the story of the lost squadron helped cement the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, an area of the Atlantic Ocean where ships and aircraft are said to disappear without a trace. The Bermuda Triangle is said to stretch from the southern U.S. coast across to Bermuda and down to the Atlantic coast of Cuba and Santo Domingo. On land, Great Isaac Lighthouse is a lighthouse on the small Bahamian island of Great Isaac Cay. Erected in 1859, it is located about 20 miles 32 km of the Bimini Islands and accessible only by boat. The lighthouse stands about 151 feet, 46 m tall. On August 4, 1969, the station was discovered to have been abandoned by its 2 keepers, who were never found. Many believers in the Bermuda Triangle claim that the keepers were 2 more victims lost to its mysterious forces. However, The hurricane record from 1969 indicates that Hurricane Anna, the first hurricane of 1969 on 1 to 2 August, passed close enough to Great Isaac Island to cause dangerous weather for the tiny rock island. By the 4th of August, the hurricane was well into the Atlantic Ocean. The grounds are open to the public, although the lighthouse itself has had stairs removed to block access to the interior of that structure. The keeper's house, cistern and assorted buildings are crumbling into ruins. The derelict collection of abandoned buildings make Great Isaac Cay a popular destination for boaters. So given all of the above information, what do you think is going on in the triangle? Do you think that it's purely a weather phenomenon where the various elements collide, or do you think that something more sinister is at play?